Okay, so today we're going deep on Varanasi,
Ooh,
this city in India that's got this nickname,
right?
the City of Death. Doesn't exactly sound like a dream vacation, does it?
Yeah, maybe not your typical tourist trap.
But it's way more interesting than it sounds at first.
Oh, absolutely.
So we're using this article here, Varanasi, the City of Life and Death, a unique perspective on mortality in India.
hmm
And we're gonna try and figure out why the city looks at death so differently than Western cultures.
You're going to find how Varanasi thinks about death is pretty mind-blowing compared to, what we're used to.
For sure. So first off, Varanasi is right there on the Ganges River.
Oh, yeah. One of the holiest spots in Hinduism.
And apparently it's one of the oldest cities in the world that people have always lived in.
Continuously inhabited, they call
Yeah.
it.
And get this, for Hindus dying in Varanasi is
It's a big deal.
yeah, if you get cremated along the Ganges, it's like a shortcut to escaping reincarnation.
They call that liberation moksha.
Moksha.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not just about dying, it's about what comes after.
Exactly.
So this article talks about this place, Mukti Bhawan.
hmm
It's a hospice, but no hospice I've ever heard of. People actually go there to die.
Yeah, it's called the House of Liberation.
Wow.
And it's specifically for people who are trying to attain moksha.
Okay.
Like they go there and the entire focus is on spiritual preparation,
Huh.
helping their soul transition peacefully.
And they have this rule, a 15-day limit on stays,
Oh, yeah.
which is kind of wild to me. Is that
Oh.
like a Hindu belief or something?
Well, that is interesting, right? The belief is that if you're really ready for moksha,
Yeah.
you should be able to pass away within that time.
15 days.
15 days.
Yeah.
It definitely raises questions like,
Yeah.
what if you don't die in 15 days? What happens then?
Do they kick you out?
Right.
Yeah.
I would love to know more about how this whole 15-day thing works.
Me too. It just seems so
Intense.
yeah, intense. There's this real urgency to it.
I think that's the point. There's this huge emphasis on achieving moksha.
Okay, so let's say someone does pass away at Mukti Bhawan. What happens next?
Then they're taken to the ghats.
The Ghats.
Yeah, the steps that go down to the river. They use them for all sorts of things, bathing rituals, even cremations.
Okay.
The most famous one is Manikarnika Ghat. That's the main cremation ghat.
So they're cremated right there by the river?
Right on the banks of the Ganges.
Mm.
Imagine it, open-air pyres burning all day and all night.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
The article mentions this guy, Kosi Chaudhary. He's been a cremation worker there since he was a kid.
Wow.
That's got to be a tough job dealing with death all the time.
Definitely not for the faint of heart. But Pachkosi is from the Dom caste.
Okay.
They're traditionally the ones who do the cremation rituals.
Huh.
And for him, death is just part of life, like a natural transition.
I guess when you see it every day, it becomes normal.
And he has this fascinating view of the body.
Yeah.
He says it's just a temporary shell.
It's not the real...
Exactly. It's the soul that matters. And a proper cremation helps the soul on its journey.
It's so different from how we think about death in the West.
Totally. We tend to be scared of it.
Yeah, we try to avoid thinking about it.
Whereas in Varanasi, they've kind of embraced it.
It's part of life.
Right. They don't see it as this scary ending.
More like another step in a longer process.
Exactly.
Which brings us back to the Ganges River.
Ah, the heart of it all.
It's not just a river to them. They see it as a goddess.
Ganga.
Right, Ganga. And she purifies the soul.
The powerful belief.
So they bathe in the Ganges, they drink its water.
All for spiritual cleansing.
Even though it's really polluted.
Yeah, the article mentions that it's actually quite heavily polluted.
So how do people reconcile that with thinking it's sacred?
It's really interesting. Their faith seems to go beyond the physical reality. Like there's this boatman in the article, Ram Bali.
Yeah.
He drinks the water every day, bathes in it. He's 73 years old and says the Ganges is why he's so healthy.
So they really believe in its power.
Their faith is unwavering.
It's more than just a river. It's like this symbol of life and death and rebirth.
And they accept that this cycle just keeps turning.
With the Ganges at the center of it all?
Exactly. Now remember we talked about moksha, escaping from reincarnation.
Right.
But for those who haven't reached moksha,
Yeah.
the Ganges Ganga becomes this essential guide on their journey through life and death.
It all ties together. The city, the river, the rituals, this whole different way of thinking about death.
It's a completely different worldview.
So we've got a basic understanding now of how Varanasi views death.
The basics.
But I'm curious, how does this acceptance actually play out in their everyday lives?
That is the question, isn't it?
Does it make them more fearless? Does it change how they value life?
That's what we need to figure out.
Okay, let's explore that.
Let's do it. Death is coming for you, but it's not this big scary thing.
Right.
It's just part of the journey. So maybe you can actually live more freely.
Instead of being afraid all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're not wasting energy on fear. You're just living.
And remember, moksha, that whole idea of breaking free from reincarnation.
Oh, yeah. That's not just some abstract concept for them.
Right. It's like woven into their everyday lives.
It's part of the fabric of their reality.
So it's not just about dying in Varanasi. It's about living with this awareness of death and the potential to, like, transcend it.
That's a great way to put it. And think about what that means for the whole community.
Yeah.
Like we talked about the Dom caste, the cremation workers.
Right. In a lot of cultures, that job is seen as, like, taboo.
Yeah, people want to avoid it.
But in Varanasi, they're respected, even revered.
They're a vital part of helping souls move on.
So it's like death, instead of separating people, it actually brings them closer.
That's a really interesting point.
I was reading that Hindus often cremate their own family members.
Really?
Yeah, instead of like paying someone else to do it.
Wow, that must be...
Intense.
Yeah, but also incredibly meaningful.
You're right. It's like it reinforces that connection between the living and the dead.
And that sense of continuity.
In the West, we try to hide death away. You know, in hospitals and funeral homes.
Yeah, we pretend it's not happening.
Which might be why we're so scared of it.
We don't have those rituals, those communal ways of dealing with death and grief.
Do you think we're missing out on something? Like, could facing death more directly help us appreciate life more?
That's a great question. I think it's definitely something to think about.
Just looking at how Varanasi does it makes you wonder.
Right. Maybe they're on something.
So, okay, let's talk about the Ganges again.
The Ganges.
It's clearly way more than just a river. It's like the main character in this whole story.
I agree. It's this powerful symbol of life, death, and rebirth.
It cleanses, it carries away the ashes of the dead, it sustains the living.
It's the lifeblood of Varanasi.
Both physically and spiritually.
When people bathe in it, drink from it, even though we know it's heavily polluted.
That just shows how strong their faith is.
Their faith goes beyond logic or science.
It's like deeply embedded in their culture.
Yeah. It's their worldview.
So even if we don't personally get it, we have to respect how much the Ganges means to them.
Absolutely. It shapes their entire understanding of the world.
And it just highlights how different cultures can have such radically different ways of relating to, like, nature and the sacred.
And death.
Yeah, death. I'm realizing there's a lot we can learn from Varanasi.
Even if we don't agree with everything.
Right. Just seeing how another culture approaches these big questions can make us rethink our own assumptions.
And open our minds to new possibilities.
Exactly. So we've looked at the death rituals, the Ganges, this whole moksha thing.
A lot to unpack.
But let's bring it back to the individual person. Like, how does this constant awareness of death actually affect people's day-to-day lives?
That's the real question, right? Does it make them more carefree? Does it influence their relationships or their goals?
Yeah. And does it bring them peace? Or does it add a layer of pressure, like they have to achieve moksha before it's too late?
We need to hear from the people of Varanasi to really understand that.
We need to hear their stories.
Their perspective would be invaluable.
Okay, let's dive into that next.
Let's do it.
You know, it's like, I can read about all this stuff, but it's hard to imagine actually living there.
Right.
Walking down the street and knowing that right over there are these ghats where they're cremating people all the time.
It's a whole different reality.
Yeah.
It makes you think, like, does it make the normal stuff feel more important?
Maybe. Yeah.
Knowing that life is short, does it make you want to enjoy every little thing more?
I think it might. Yeah, maybe seeing death all the time makes them appreciate life in a way that we don't.
It could even make you less afraid.
Right, because fear of dying that can really hold you back.
Oh, absolutely. In Western culture, we let that fear control us
It
sometimes.
stops us from doing things.
Keeps us from really living.
I'm starting to see how Varanasi's perspective could be, like, freeing.
Mhm.
It's not about being obsessed with death, but about accepting it.
As part of life.
Yeah, and maybe that helps you focus on what's really important.
The present moment. The things that matter most.
Because if this life isn't forever,
Right.
then you've got to make the most of it. So, okay, we've learned a lot about Varanasi.
From just this one article.
There's definitely a lot more to explore, but what do you think is, like, the main takeaway for our listeners?
I think the biggest thing is that death is something we all face.
It's universal.
But how we deal with it, how we think about it, that's all influenced by our culture, our beliefs, our own personal experiences.
And Varanasi shows us that there's no one right way to look at death.
There are so many different perspectives out there.
each with its own beauty and wisdom.
And by learning about these different perspectives,
Up and challenge our own ideas.
maybe even find a new understanding of what death means to us.
So for anyone listening who's feeling like kind of deep in their thoughts right now,
Yeah.
I want you to think about how your own culture has shaped your view of death.
It's something we don't always think about.
But it's important. And if you're curious, I'd say go explore some other spiritual traditions and how they approach death. You might be surprised by what you find.
It's a journey worth taking.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Varanasi.
It's been fascinating.
We hope it's made you think, made you question things, and maybe even shifted your perspective a little.
Keep exploring.
Keep questioning, and until next time, keep diving deep.